The old wooden porch creaked under her weight as she sat watching the dust settle on the gravel road. Another hot Texas afternoon stretched endlessly before her, just like all the others. At 23, she felt older than her years, worn down by a life that seemed determined to remind her daily that she wasn't enough. Her younger brother and sister were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. She smiled watching them, remembering when she used to laugh like that, before the words started cutting deeper than any physical wound ever could, before she learned to make herself small and invisible. "You're doing it again," her mother's voice cut through the peaceful moment like a knife. "Sitting there doing nothing while there's work to be done?" She stood quickly, brushing the dust off her worn jeans. "Sorry, Mama, I was just watching the kids." "That's your problem right there," her mother continued, stepping onto the porch with arms crossed. "Always watching, never doing anything useful. Your father would be ashamed." The words hit their mark, just like they always did. Her father had been gone for 3 years now, taken by a heart attack that came without warning. Since then, her mother had grown bitter, her tongue sharper with each passing season. The ranch was struggling, money was tight, and somehow everything that went wrong became her fault. "I finished feeding the chickens and checking the fence line this morning," she said quietly, not meeting her mother's eyes. "And look how that turned out. Mrs. Henderson called to say 3 of our chickens were in her yard again. Can't even fix a fence properly." Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She had noticed that loose board but hadn't been sure how to fix it. Every time she tried to help with repairs, she seemed to make things worse. Her father had always been the handy one, and after he died, she'd tried to fill that role but never quite managed it. "I'll go fix it right now," she offered. "Don't bother. I'll have to do it myself anyway if I want it done right." The familiar sting of rejection settled in her chest. She'd heard these words so many times they'd become like background music to her life. Not good enough. Not smart enough. Not worth the trouble. Her mother went back inside, the screen door slamming behind her. She remained on the porch, feeling the weight of another failed attempt to prove her worth. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, matching the heat of shame burning in her cheeks. Walking to the barn, she found comfort in the familiar smell of hay and leather. The animals didn't judge her. They didn't care that she wasn't as pretty as her cousin or as smart as her sister. To them, she was just the girl who brought food and spoke softly. She started brushing down Thunder, their old gelding, letting the rhythmic motion calm her racing thoughts. The horse leaned into her touch, appreciating the gentle care. At least, here, in this quiet space, she felt like she had purpose. "You understand, don't you, boy?" she whispered to the horse. "Sometimes it feels like nothing we do is ever good enough." Thunder snorted softly, as if agreeing with her assessment of the world. The barn door creaked, and her heart sank, expecting another lecture from her mother. Instead, her little sister appeared, pigtails bouncing as she skipped over. "Why do you always hide in here?" the 8-year-old asked, climbing onto a hay bale. "I'm not hiding. I'm taking care of Thunder. Mama says you're too slow and clumsy to help with the real work." The innocent words from her sister's mouth somehow hurt worse than when they came directly from their mother. Her sister was just repeating what she'd heard, not understanding the damage those words could do. "Maybe Mama's right," she said, putting down the brush. "I don't think so. You fixed my doll when her arm came off. And you helped me with my math homework. Mama can't do fractions." Despite everything, she smiled. Her little sister always had a way of finding the bright spots, even in the darkest moments. "Thanks, little bit. That means a lot." As evening approached, she helped her mother prepare dinner, moving carefully around the small kitchen to avoid any accidents that might trigger another lecture. The silence between them was heavy, filled with years of disappointment and unmet expectations. Her brother came in from playing, dirt streaked across his face and a scraped knee from some adventure. Without thinking, she moved to clean him up, but her mother intervened. "Let me do it. You'll probably just make it worse." She stepped back, watching her mother tend to the boy with the gentleness that used to be reserved for her too. Before her father died, before the money ran out, before everything became her fault. That night, lying in her small bedroom, She stared at the ceiling and wondered what would become of her. Other girls her age were getting married, starting families, building lives filled with hope and possibility. But who would want someone like her? Someone her own mother called useless? The ranch was all she'd ever known. These rolling hills and endless skies had been her world since birth. But lately they felt more like a prison than a home. Every sunrise brought new opportunities to disappoint, new ways to prove she wasn't worthy of the space she occupied. She thought about her father, how he used to tell her she was his special girl, how he'd taught her to read the weather and understand the animals, how he'd believed she could do anything she set her mind to. Those memories felt like glimpses of another life, one where she had value and purpose. The wind picked up outside, rattling the old windows and carrying the scent of approaching rain. Tomorrow would bring more of the same, more chances to fail, more reminders of her inadequacy, more proof that her mother was right about her. But tonight, in the darkness of her room, she allowed herself to dream of something different. A life where someone might see past her mistakes and awkward moments, where kindness existed without conditions, where she might finally discover that the voice in her head, the one that sounded so much like her mother's, might actually be wrong. She had no way of knowing that tomorrow would bring a stranger to their gate. A man who would see her not as a burden or a disappointment, but as exactly what he'd been searching for all his life. Tonight she was just a young woman convinced of her own worthlessness, preparing for another day of trying to earn love that seemed forever out of reach. The rain began to fall, gentle at first, then harder, drumming against the roof like fingers tapping out a message she couldn't quite understand. But change was coming, whether she was ready for it or not. The morning sun was already climbing high when the dust cloud appeared on the horizon. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, her mother's voice still ringing in her ears from their earlier argument about breakfast being too salty. The white sheets flapped in the warm breeze as she watched the approaching vehicle with curiosity. A beat-up pickup truck pulled into their driveway, its engine coughing like an old man with too many cigarettes behind him. The driver stepped out slowly, stretching his back after what looked like a long journey. He was tall, maybe late 20s, with the kind of weathered hands that spoke of years working outdoors. His jeans were faded but clean, his boots worn, but well-maintained. She found herself watching from behind the laundry line, using the hanging sheets as cover. Strangers didn't come to their ranch often, especially not ones looking for work. Most people knew the Martinez family was struggling, barely keeping their heads above water since her father passed. "Can I help you?" her mother's voice carried across the yard as she stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Morning, ma'am. Name's Jake Thompson. I'm looking for work. Heard you might need an extra hand around here." Her mother looked him up and down with a suspicious eye she reserved for anyone who might cost them money they didn't have. "We're not exactly hiring right now. Times are tough." "I understand that, ma'am. But I work hard, don't ask for much, and I know my way around cattle and horses. Been working ranches up in Montana until the drought forced some closures. I can do repairs, handle the animals, whatever needs doing." From her hiding spot, she watched her mother consider the offer. They did need help badly. The fence line was falling apart in 3 places, 2 of the water pumps needed fixing, and they were behind on everything from branding to medical checks for the cattle. "What kind of pay you expecting?" her mother asked, arms crossed. "Room and board plus whatever you can spare. I'm not looking to get rich, just need steady work and a place to sleep." Her mother was quiet for a long moment, probably calculating how little she could get away with paying him. "There's a small room above the barn. It's not much, but it's clean and dry. Meals with the family and $50 a week when we can manage it." "That sounds fair to me, ma'am." "Well then, I suppose we can try it for a month, see how it works out. But I'll warn you now, this family's been through enough trouble. I've got 3 kids to think about, and I can't have any complications around here." She wondered what her mother meant by complications, but Jake just nodded respectfully. "Understood, ma'am. You won't have any problems from me. My oldest daughter there behind the laundry line thinks she's hiding, but she's more trouble than she's worth." Clumsy as the day is long and about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Best you just ignore her and focus on the work. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment as she realized she'd been spotted. Even worse, her mother was already poisoning the stranger against her before he'd even properly arrived. She wanted to disappear into the ground. Jake's eyes found her through the gap in the sheets, and for a moment their gazes met. She expected to see judgment or dismissal, the same look most people gave her after her mother's introductions. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like sympathy. "I'm sure everyone here has their strengths," he said diplomatically, still looking in her direction. "I've found that people surprise you when you give them a chance." Her mother made a dismissive sound. "Well, you'll learn soon enough. Come on, I'll show you where you'll be staying and introduce you to the animals." As they walked toward the barn, she heard her mother continuing her commentary. "The boy's 12, and the little girl's 8. They're good kids. But the oldest one, she's been nothing but problems since her father died. Can't do anything right, breaks more than she fixes. I keep hoping she finds someone to marry her off to. But what man wants a wife who can't cook, can't clean properly, and trips over her own feet?" The words cut deep, just like they always did. But somehow, hearing them said to this stranger made them hurt even more. She abandoned the laundry and hurried into the house, not wanting to hear any more of her mother's catalog of her failures. Through the kitchen window, she watched Jake inspect the barn and the equipment. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew what he was looking at, checking fence posts and examining the tools with practiced eyes. When her mother pointed out various problems that needed fixing, he nodded thoughtfully, already forming plans in his mind. "What do you think of him?" Her little sister asked, appearing beside her at the window. "Seems nice enough. Mama's already told him to stay away from me, though." "Why would she do that?" She looked down at her sister's innocent face and tried to find words that wouldn't sound too bitter. "Mama thinks I'm not good company for anyone." "That's silly. You're the best company. You listen to my stories and you don't get mad when I ask too many questions." Despite her mood, she smiled and ruffled her sister's hair. "Thanks, little bit, but grown-ups see things differently." Later that afternoon, Jake started work by fixing the gate that had been stuck for 2 months. She watched from the kitchen as he examined the hinges, oiled the mechanism, and adjusted the posts until it swung smoothly again. Her father would have known how to do that, but she'd never learned those kinds of skills. During dinner, Jake sat quietly at their small table, listening to her mother's endless commentary about everything wrong with the ranch, the weather, and the world in general. Her brother and sister chattered about their day, but she remained silent, afraid that anything she said would give her mother more ammunition for criticism. "Tomorrow I'll start on that north fence line," Jake said during a brief pause in conversation. "Looks like it needs about 20 new posts and fresh wire." "Good. Maybe now we can keep our cattle where they belong instead of chasing them off the neighbor's property every week." Her mother shot a meaningful look in her direction, and she felt her cheeks redden again. Last week she thought she'd properly secured that gate, but apparently hadn't done it right. "These things happen," Jake said easily. "Cattle are clever creatures. They'll find every weak spot in a fence if you give them time." It wasn't exactly a defense, but it wasn't an attack either. She found herself glancing at him curiously, wondering why he wasn't joining in her mother's criticism after dinner. As she cleared the dishes, she could hear Jake outside talking to the horses. His voice was low and gentle, the kind of tone her father used to use with the animals. When she peeked out the window, she saw him brushing down thunder with slow, patient strokes. "You're a good old boy, aren't you?" she heard him saying. "Bet you've seen a lot of changes around here. Must be hard when the family's hurting." Something about the way he spoke to the horse made her think he understood more than he was letting on. Maybe he'd seen families like theirs before, struggling to hold things together after losing the person who held them all up. As she finished washing dishes, she wondered what tomorrow would bring. Would Jake last longer than the previous hired hand who'd quit after 2 weeks of her mother's constant complaints? Would he decide she really was as useless as her mother claimed? Outside, the sun was setting over the Texas hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jake was still in the barn, settling in for his first night. She found herself hoping he'd stay, if only because having another person around might take some of the pressure off her. But experience had taught her not to get her hopes up about anything good lasting very long around their ranch. 3 weeks had passed since Jake arrived, and she'd managed to stay mostly invisible, just like her mother preferred. She did her chores early in the morning or late in the evening, avoiding the times when he was working around the main areas of the ranch. It was easier that way, safer than risking another embarrassing moment in front of someone new, but this morning was different. Her mother had sent her to help repair the fence near the south pasture, claiming they needed all available hands for the job. She suspected it was really because her mother wanted to stay inside and avoid the heat, but she didn't dare argue. Jake was already there when she arrived, pulling out old fence posts with a tool she didn't recognize. He looked up and nodded when he saw her approaching with a toolbox and some replacement boards. "Morning," he said simply, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Your mother said you'd be helping today?" "Yes, sir. Though I should warn you, I'm not very good with tools." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, her mother's voice echoing in her head. "Well, there's always something to learn. Why don't you start by handing me those new posts when I ask for them?" She nodded, grateful for a simple task she probably couldn't mess up. For the next hour they worked in comfortable silence. Jake would point to what he needed and she'd hand it over. It felt good to be useful, even in such a small way. Then disaster struck. She was carrying a replacement board across the uneven ground when her foot caught in a hidden hole. She went down hard and the board flew from her hands, landing squarely on a section of fence they'd just finished repairing. The impact split the new board in half and knocked 2 posts loose. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," she whispered, scrambling to her feet and staring at the damage. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Before Jake could even respond, her mother's voice cut through the morning air like a whip crack. She must have been watching from the house. "What did you do now?" Her mother came storming across the field, her face red with anger and embarrassment. "Can't even carry a simple board without destroying everything around you?" She wanted to explain about the hole, about how it was hidden by tall grass, but the words stuck in her throat. Her mother was already cataloging her failures for Jake's benefit. "This is exactly what I was talking about," her mother continued, gesturing at the broken fence. "Give her one simple job and she finds a way to make it 10 times worse. Now we'll have to buy more supplies we can't afford." Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. Crying would only make things worse, prove her mother right about her being weak and useless. "It's my fault," Jake said suddenly, stepping between her and her mother. "I should have warned her about that hole. I saw it earlier but forgot to mention. The board's probably salvageable anyway, just needs a different cut." Her mother turned her glare on Jake. "Don't make excuses for her. She needs to learn to watch where she's going. Accidents happen to everyone, ma'am. I've probably broken more fence boards than I can count over the years. Part of learning the work." Her mother looked like she wanted to argue more, but something in Jake's calm, steady voice seemed to deflate her anger slightly. "Well, just make sure it doesn't happen again. We can't afford to keep replacing materials because of carelessness." With, that, she stalked back toward the house, leaving them alone with the damaged fence. The silence stretched uncomfortably. She knelt down and started picking up the pieces of the broken board, her hands shaking slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "She's right. I should have been more careful." "Hey." Jake's voice was gentle. She looked up to find him crouched beside her. That hole was completely hidden. I stepped in it myself yesterday and nearly went down. Could have happened to anyone. But it didn't happen to anyone. It happened to me. It always happens to me." Jake was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "How long has she been talking?" "Do you like that?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean? Your mother, the way she speaks to you. How long has that been going on?" She felt heat creep up her neck. "She's just frustrated. Money's tight, and I do seem to make things harder sometimes." "That's not an answer to my question." She stood up quickly, brushing dirt off her jeans. We should get back to work. She'd be upset if we fall behind. But Jake didn't move to pick up his tools. Instead, he sat back on his heels and looked at her with those steady brown eyes that seemed to see too much. Back in Montana, I worked for a family that had a daughter about your age. Sweetest girl you'd ever meet, but her father convinced her she was stupid because she had trouble with reading. Turned out she just needed glasses. Amazing how much someone can bloom when they're not being told they're worthless every day. Her chest tightened. That's different. Is it? Before she could answer, he stood and picked up the broken board, examining it carefully. Look here, he said, pointing to where it had split. See how clean this break is. This piece is still perfectly good for a shorter section. And this part here could work for a gate repair I've been planning. Nothing really wasted. She watched as he measured the pieces, his hands confident and sure. Everything seemed so much simpler when he handled it. Could you hand me that saw? He asked. I'll show you how to make a clean cut. For the next few minutes, he walked her through the process, explaining each step in simple terms. His patience was something she wasn't used to. When she hesitated or asked questions, he answered without any trace of irritation. Now you try, he said, guiding her hands to the right position on the saw. What if I mess it up? Then we'll try. Again, wood's cheap, and practice is how you learn. Her first cut was crooked, but Jake just nodded encouragingly. Better than my first attempt. Let's try another one. By the third piece, she was starting to get the hang of it. The satisfaction of making a clean, straight cut was unlike anything she'd felt in a long time. There you go, Jake said with a smile that reached his eyes. Natural talent coming through. She felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. When was the last time someone had praised her work instead of criticizing it? They worked together for the rest of the morning, Jake teaching her small tricks and techniques along the way. He showed her how to test if a post was solid, how to stretch wire properly, and how to recognize when wood was starting to rot. My father used to know all this stuff, she found herself saying as they took a water break in the shade. He teach you any of it? Some, but then he got sick, and after he died, Mama said there was no point in me learning man's work when I couldn't even handle woman's work properly. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Seems to me like useful skills are useful skills, no matter who's doing them. Your father sounds like he was a smart man. He was. He used to tell me I could do anything I set my mind to. She immediately regretted. Sharing something so personal sounds like good advice to me. When her mother called them for lunch, Jake made a point of praising her help in front of the family. She's got good instincts for this kind of work, he told her mother. Quick learner, too. Her mother just made a non-committal sound, but her siblings looked impressed. Her little sister even asked if she could help with projects too that afternoon. Jake left a small wildflower on her windowsill, nothing fancy. Just a simple yellow bloom he'd probably picked while checking the fence line. She found it when she went to her room to change clothes, and for some reason, it made her eyes water. Nobody had given her flowers since her father used to bring her dandelions. When she was small, she pressed the flower between the pages of her old diary, the one she'd stopped writing in years ago when words became too hard to find. Maybe, she thought, it was time to start writing again. Maybe there were good things happening that deserved to be remembered. Outside her window, she could see Jake working on the gate repair, using the wood they'd salvaged from her morning accident. Nothing wasted, just like he'd said. Maybe that was true for people too. Maybe even someone like her could be salvaged and put to good use, given the right hands to guide the work. The emergency started at dawn with the sound of cattle in distress. She woke to her mother's panicked voice calling for Jake from the back porch, something about the animals acting strange in the south pasture. By the time she'd thrown on clothes and rushed outside, Jake was already heading toward the field with her mother close behind. She followed at a distance, her stomach knotting with worry. The cattle were their livelihood, and losing even a few would be devastating for their already struggling finances. As they approached the herd, she could see something was definitely wrong. Several cows were lying down in the middle of the day, breathing heavily, while others stood with their heads hanging low. "What do you think it is?" her mother asked Jake, her voice tight with fear. Jake knelt beside one of the affected animals, checking its eyes and feeling along its neck. "Hard to say for sure. Could be bloat, could be something they ate." "Did anything change in their routine lately? New feed, different grazing area?" "Nothing's different. Same feed, same pasture they've been using all month." She watched from behind them as Jake examined another cow, his brow furrowed with concentration. The animal's breathing was labored, and there was something about its expression that reminded her of when their old dog had gotten into the neighbor's compost pile years ago. "Jake," she said quietly, then cleared her throat when he didn't hear. "Jake?" Both he and her mother turned toward her mother's expression already showing irritation at the interruption. "What is it?" Jake asked, his tone more patient than her mother's would have been. "I think. Well, I'm probably wrong, but the way they're acting reminds me of something my father once dealt with. There used to be some wild cherry trees near the old water tank, and when cattle ate the wilted leaves, they got sick like this." Her mother immediately dismissed the idea. "Those trees were cut down 2 years ago. Besides, what would you know about cattle sickness?" But Jake was looking at her with interest. "Tell me more about what you remember." She felt heat rise in her cheeks as both adults focused on her. "Daddy said the fresh leaves were fine, but when they wilted or got damaged by frost, they became poisonous. The cows would get weak and have trouble breathing, just like this." "And what did your father do to treat it?" Jake asked. "He used to mix up something. Let me think." She closed her eyes, trying to remember her father's voice explaining the remedy. He said the poison stopped the blood from carrying oxygen properly, so he'd give them a mixture of, what was it called? Something with methylene in the name. And he'd make them walk around to keep their blood moving. Jake's eyes widened slightly, methylene blue. That's exactly right for cherry leaf poisoning. Where would he have gotten it? The farm supply store in town. He kept some in the medicine cabinet in the barn, said every cattle rancher should have it on hand. Her mother looked skeptical. "That old medicine cabinet hasn't been touched since." "He died. Everything in there is probably expired or useless by now." "Worth checking, though," Jake said, already heading toward the barn. "And we should look around for any cherry trees or fallen branches. Even old prunings can be dangerous if the cattle got into them." As they walked toward the barn, her mind was racing through memories of her father's emergency treatments. She'd only been a teenager then, but she'd followed him around like a shadow, watching everything he did and hanging on every word he said about ranch work. The old medicine cabinet was rusty and covered in dust, but when Jake pried it open, there were several bottles inside. She scanned the labels until she found what she was looking for. "Here," she said, pulling out a small brown bottle. "Methylene blue solution? It's past the expiration date, though." Jake examined the bottle carefully, only by a year. "Should still be effective in an emergency like this." "How much did your father use?" She bit her lip, trying to remember. "He weighed the animals first, then measured based on that. I think it was something like 1 cc per 100 pounds, but I'm not completely sure. That sounds about right for the dosage I know." "You remember anything else about the treatment?" "He always said to be careful not to give too much, and to make sure they kept moving afterward, and ... She paused, another memory surfacing. "He checked their gums. When they turned from blue back to pink, he knew the treatment was working." Jake nodded approvingly. "Your father knew what he was doing. Let's see if we can find any cherry branches or leaves around the pasture." They split up to search the area, and within minutes, her brother came running over with excitement. "Found something," he called, pointing to a pile of brush near the fence line. There, half hidden under some grass, were several branches heavy with wilted cherry leaves. They must have blown over from the neighbor's property during the windstorm 3 days earlier. "That's it," Jake said grimly. "That's what made them sick." Working together, they treated the affected cattle one by one. Jake handled the injections while she held the animals steady and monitored their condition. Her mother supervised anxiously. clearly torn between gratitude and disbelief that her supposedly useless daughter had identified the problem. "How did you know all that?" Jake asked as they worked on the fourth cow. "That's pretty specialized knowledge." "My father taught me a lot of things before he died. Mama says it's all useless information now, but I always remembered his stories about different emergencies he'd handled over the years. Well, this useless information just saved us a fortune in vet bills and possibly saved these animals' lives." The treatment worked exactly as she remembered. Within an hour, the cattle were standing straighter, breathing easier, and their gums had returned to a healthy pink color. Jake made them walk around the pasture to keep their circulation going, and by evening they were grazing normally again. At dinner that night, Jake made sure to tell the whole family how she'd identified the problem and remembered the correct treatment. "If she hadn't spoken up, we would have lost at least 3 head of cattle," he said to her mother. "Maybe more." That knowledge she learned from her father just saved the ranch thousands of dollars. Her little sister looked at her with wide eyes. "You're like an animal doctor." "I'm not a doctor," she said quickly, not wanting to oversell herself. "I just remembered what Daddy taught me." Sometimes remembering the right thing at the right time is the most important skill of all, Jake said, meeting her eyes across the table. Her mother was unusually quiet during the meal, occasionally glancing at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not approval exactly, but maybe the beginning of recognition that her daughter might actually know something useful after all. Later, as they were cleaning up the dinner dishes, her mother surprised her by speaking quietly while Jake was outside, checking on the cattle one more time. "Your father always said you had a good memory for the important things. I'd forgotten about that." It wasn't an apology, but it was closer to a compliment than she'd heard from her mother in years. That night, Jake knocked on the kitchen door as she was finishing the last of the dishes. "Got a minute?" he asked. She dried her hands and stepped outside onto the porch with him. The evening air was cool and filled with the sound of crickets. "I wanted to thank you again for today," he said. "But more than that, I wanted to ask you something. What other things did your father teach you? Because what you showed today, that wasn't basic knowledge. That was real expertise." She felt embarrassed by his attention, but also secretly pleased. "He taught me lots of things. How to read the weather, how to know when animals are getting sick before it gets serious, which plants are good for treating different problems. Mama says it's all old-fashioned nonsense now." Old-fashioned, maybe, but not nonsense. That kind of knowledge used to be passed down through generations for a reason. It works. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Would you be willing to teach me some of what you know?" Jake asked. "I've learned a lot working different ranches, but there's always more to learn, especially from someone who grew up here." The request stunned her. Someone wanted to learn from her? I don't know if I'd be much of a teacher." "You'd be a great teacher. You explain things clearly and you obviously understand the work. Your father would be proud of how much you remembered and how you used it today." As Jake walked back to his room above the barn, she stayed on the porch, thinking about his words. For the first time in years, she felt like maybe she did have something valuable to offer. Maybe all those hours following her father around, listening to his stories and soaking up his knowledge, hadn't been wasted after all. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd start paying more attention to the animals again, trusting her instincts instead of dismissing them. Maybe there were other ways she could help, other problems she could spot before they became emergencies. The thought both excited and terrified her, but for once, excitement was winning. The trouble started brewing 3 days after the cattle incident. She'd noticed her mother watching her and Jake work together with an expression that grew darker each day. Where once her mother had seemed relieved to have Jake's help around the ranch, now she appeared increasingly agitated whenever she saw them talking or working side by side. It came to a head on a Thursday morning when she was helping Jake repair the water pump near the main barn. He'd been asking her questions about her father's methods for maintaining the equipment, genuinely interested in learning the specific techniques that worked best in their particular climate and soil conditions. Your father was smart to use this type of seal, Jake was saying, pointing to a rubber gasket. Most people don't realize how much the heat here can affect the standard ones. She felt a warm glow of pride hearing her father's wisdom praised. He always said the little details were what separated good ranchers from failed ones. He was absolutely right. These small tricks can save thousands of dollars over time. They were so focused on their work that neither of them noticed her mother approaching until her shadow fell across the pump housing. "Jake, I need to speak with you." Privately. Something in her mother's tone made her stomach clench with dread. The older woman's face was set in hard lines, and her eyes held that dangerous glitter that usually meant someone was about to receive a lecture they'd never forget. "Of course, ma'am," Jake said, straightening up and wiping his hands on a rag. "We're just finishing up here anyway." "No, you're not finishing up. You're done. Permanently." Her mother's voice was ice cold. "Both of you, come with me, now." They followed her to the shade of the big oak tree near the house, away from where her siblings might overhear. Her mother's entire body was rigid with anger, and she could feel the familiar panic rising in her chest. Whatever was coming, it was going to be bad. "I've been watching you, too," her mother began, her voice low and controlled in the way that always preceded her worst explosions. "And I've seen enough." Jake looked confused. "Ma'am, if there's a problem with my work, Your work is fine, it's everything else that's the problem." Her mother turned her cold gaze on her daughter. "And you, acting like you know something about ranching just because you remembered one old remedy, getting ideas above your station." The words hit like physical blows, but she forced herself to remain silent. Speaking up now would only make things worse. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand what you're upset about." Jake said carefully. Her mother laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, I think you understand perfectly well. You think I don't see what's happening here? You think I'm blind?" She felt her cheeks burn with shame and embarrassment. Her mother was going to say it all out loud, every humiliating detail of her inadequacies. "You want to know about my daughter?" Her mother continued, her voice gaining strength and venom. "Let me tell you exactly what kind of person you're wasting your time on." Jake opened his mouth to protest, but her mother held up a hand to silence him. "She's 23 years old and has never held a real job because she can't handle responsibility. She's broken more things around this ranch than I can count. She can barely cook a decent meal without burning something or adding too much salt. She's clumsy, she's careless, and she's never finished anything she started." Each word was like a knife twisting in her chest. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear completely, but her feet seemed rooted to the ground. "But that's not even the worst of it," her mother pressed on relentlessly. "You want to know why no man has ever stuck around long enough to marry her? Because she's damaged goods. Her father spoiled her rotten, filling her head with nonsense about being special and capable. When he died, reality hit and she fell apart. Completely." "Ma'am, that's enough," Jake said firmly, but her mother wasn't finished. "She spent 6 months after the funeral crying every day and refusing to help with anything. Left me to handle 3 kids and a failing ranch all by myself while she wallowed in self-pity. And when she finally did start helping again, she was worse than useless. I've spent 3 years trying to make something worthwhile out of her, but some people just can't be fixed." The silence that followed was deafening. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could feel the familiar burn of tears threatening to spill over. Every word her mother had spoken felt true, felt like an accurate description of the failure she'd always known herself to. "She's not your responsibility," her mother continued, her voice softer now but no less cutting. "I know she's probably been batting her eyelashes at you, trying to make you feel sorry for her. That's what she does. She makes people think they can save her, fix her, make her into something she's not. But you can't fix damaged goods, Jake. You can only waste your time trying." Jake's jaw was tight, and she could see a muscle twitching in his cheek. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I think you're being unfair." "Unfair?" Her mother's voice rose. "I'm being honest. Something no one else has ever had the courage to be with her." "You think you see something?" Special in her because she remembered one thing her father taught her? That was a fluke. One lucky guess doesn't erase years of failures. She wanted to speak, wanted to defend herself, but what could she say? Her mother wasn't lying about most of it. She had fallen apart after her father died. She had been careless and clumsy. She had failed at most things she'd tried. Let me make this very simple for you, her mother said, turning her full attention to Jake. You have two choices. You can stay away from my daughter and focus on the work I'm paying you to do, or you can pack your things and find employment elsewhere. This ranch can't afford complications, as she is nothing but complications. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between her mother and her. She held her breath, waiting for him to make the sensible choice. Waiting for him to realize her mother was right and walk away like everyone else eventually did. And what if I refuse both options? Jake asked finally, her mother's face hardened. Then you'll be gone by tomorrow morning, and you'll never work another ranch in this county. I know people, Jake. I can make sure word gets around about troublemakers who don't respect family boundaries. The threat hung in the air like smoke. From afar, she knew her mother wasn't bluffing. The ranching community was tight-knit, and reputation meant everything. If her mother wanted to destroy Jake's chances of finding work locally, she probably could. I need some time to think about this, Jake said carefully. You have until tomorrow morning. And until you decide, I don't want you talking to her, working with her, or even looking in her direction. Are we clear? Crystal clear, ma'am. Her mother nodded sharply and walked back toward the house, leaving them standing under the tree in uncomfortable silence. She couldn't bring herself to look at Jake. The shame was overwhelming, crushing her chest until she could barely breathe. Everything her mother had said was true, and now Jake knew it all. The pretense was over. The brief fantasy that someone might see value in her was shattered. I'm sorry, she whispered, still staring at the ground. I'm sorry you got dragged into this. I never meant for any of this to happen. Hey, Jake said softly, but she was already backing away. Please don't, she said, her voice breaking. Just please don't make this harder than it already is. She turned and ran toward the house, not stopping until she reached her room. There, finally alone, she let the tears come. They poured out like a dam had burst, carrying with them all the pain and humiliation of the past hour. Her mother was right. She was damaged goods. She was more trouble than she was worth. And now Jake knew it too. Outside her window, she could see him standing where she'd left him, looking up at the house with an expression she couldn't read. Tomorrow morning, he'd probably be gone. It would be the smart thing to do, the sensible thing. She couldn't blame him for choosing his future over a broken girl who brought nothing but problems to everyone around her. She pulled her pillow over her head and tried to block out the world, wishing she could disappear entirely. Some people weren't meant to be saved, and she was finally ready to accept that she was one of them. She spent the night curled up on her bed, still wearing her work clothes from the day before. Every time she closed her eyes, her mother's words echoed in her mind like a broken record. Damaged goods, more trouble than she's worth. Can't be fixed? The phrases circled endlessly, each repetition driving the pain deeper into her chest. Dawn was breaking through her bedroom window when she heard the familiar creak of Jake's boots on the porch steps. Her heart clenched, knowing this was probably goodbye. He'd pack his things, thank her mother for the opportunity, and drive away in his beat-up truck. She'd watch from her window as another person chose the sensible option and left her behind, but instead of heading to the barn to collect his belongings, the footsteps stopped outside the kitchen door. She heard the soft knock, heard her mother's voice answering, then nothing but muffled conversation for several minutes. When the talking stopped, she expected to hear his truck starting up. Instead, she heard his boots walking around the house toward her window. Hey, his voice came through the glass, quiet but determined. Can you come outside? We need to talk. Her stomach dropped. This was it, the conversation where he'd explain why he had to leave, why her mother was right, why she wasn't worth the trouble. She considered pretending to be asleep, but something in his tone made her get up and walk to the window. He was standing in the morning light, his hat in his hands, looking more serious than she'd ever seen him. But he wasn't holding a suitcase, and his truck was still parked in the same spot as yesterday. "I just had a very interesting conversation with your mother," he said when she opened the window. She winced. "Jake, you don't have to explain anything. I understand why you have to go. Who said anything about going?" The question caught her off guard. "Tish, she gave you an ultimatum. She said you had to choose." "I did choose." "That's what I want to talk to you about. Will you come outside?" Against her better judgment, she found herself walking to the kitchen door and stepping onto the back porch. The morning air was cool, and she wrapped her arms around herself as much for comfort as for warmth. Jake was waiting for her, his expression gentle but determined. "First, I want you to know exactly what your mother told me yesterday, word for word, because I think you deserve to hear the truth about what she said." She started to shake her head. "I already know what she said. I was there." "You heard part of it, but after you left, she had more to say." His voice was calm, but she could see anger flickering in his eyes. "She told me you were worthless, that you'd never amount to anything, that you were a burden on this family. She said you were too damaged to ever be worth loving, and that I'd be a fool to waste my time on someone who brings nothing but problems." Each word hit like a physical blow, even though she'd expected them. Hearing them repeated somehow made them feel more real, more final. "She was protecting you," she whispered. "She was telling you the truth so you wouldn't make a mistake." Jake stepped closer, and she could see every detail of his face in the morning light. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the laugh lines around his eyes, the stubble on his jaw. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much either. "Now I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you," he said, his voice steady and clear. "Because these are my words, not hers, and they're the absolute truth." She tried to look away, but something in his tone held her attention. "You are not worthless. You are not damaged goods. You are not a burden or a mistake or any of the other cruel things she's convinced you to believe about yourself." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "You don't understand. You don't know all the things I've done wrong, all the ways I've failed. You're right, I don't know everything about your past, but I know what I've seen these past few weeks. I've seen you work harder than anyone else on this ranch. I've seen you remember things that saved our cattle and probably saved this family from financial ruin. I've seen you be patient with your siblings, gentle with the animals, and kind to a stranger who showed up at your door." She shook her head, trying to reject his words. "But I break things. I make mistakes. I'm clumsy and awkward and—" "You're human," Jake interrupted firmly. "You make mistakes because everyone makes mistakes. The difference is, when you mess up, you've been trained to see it as proof that you're worthless instead of just proof that you're learning." The tears were coming now despite her efforts to stop them. "My mother's not wrong about everything. I did fall apart when my father died. I was useless for months." "You were grieving," Jake said gently. "You lost the person who believed in you most, and then instead of getting support and understanding, you got criticism and blame. Of course. You fell apart. Anyone would have." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, feeling embarrassed by her tears. "I don't understand why you're saying all this. Your job here depends on staying away from me." "Actually, it doesn't." Jake's mouth curved into a small smile. "See, I made my choice, and I told your mother exactly what I decided." Her heart stopped. "You chose the job? No, I chose you." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and wonderful and terrifying all at once. "I told your mother that she was wrong about you, that I've seen your worth with my own eyes, and that I'm not going anywhere," Jake continued. "I also told her that if she wants me to leave, she'll have to fire me outright, because I won't be bullied into abandoning someone I care about." She stared at him in shock. You stood up to her for me?" "I did." "And you know what she said when I told her I wasn't backing down?" She shook her head, unable to speak. "She said I was making the biggest mistake of my life, and I told her she was wrong about that too. Because the biggest mistake I could make would be walking away from the best thing that's happened to me in years. The tears were flowing freely now, but they felt different than the tears of the night before. These carried something that felt almost like hope. Jake, I don't understand. Why would you risk your job for someone like me? He stepped even closer, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his presence. Because you're not someone like you, you're you. You're intelligent and compassionate and stronger than you know. You're everything I've been looking for without even realizing I was looking. She felt like she was drowning in his words and the impossibility of someone seeing her this way. But what if my mother's right? What if I really am too damaged? What? If I disappoint you? Jake reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't move, he gently touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. Then we'll figure it out together. Because that's what people do when they care about each other. They don't give up at the first sign of trouble. They don't abandon each other when things get difficult. She closed her eyes, leaning into his. Touched despite herself. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. I'm scared too. But I'm more scared of losing you than I am of fighting for you. When she opened her eyes, he was smiling at her with such warmth and certainty that she almost believed him. Almost believed that maybe, just maybe, she could be worth something to someone. What happens now? She asked. Now we take it one day at a time. We work together, we learn from each other, and we prove to everyone, including yourself, that you're worth fighting for. Behind them, she could hear her mother moving around in the kitchen, probably furious that Jake had defied her ultimatum. There would be consequences, she knew. Her mother didn't give up control easily, and this rebellion would make life more difficult for everyone. But for the first time in years, she felt like maybe the fight might be worth it. Maybe she was worth it. Okay, she said quietly. One day at a time? Jake's smile widened, and she felt something long frozen in her chest begin to thaw. It was terrifying and wonderful and completely overwhelming, but it was also the beginning of something new. Something that belonged to her, not to her mother's expectations or her own fears. For the first time since her father died, she felt like she might actually have a future worth looking forward to. The change didn't happen overnight, but it started the very next day. With Jake's words still echoing in her mind, she found herself walking a little straighter, speaking a little louder. It was as if someone had lit a small candle in the darkness she'd been living in for years, and though the flame was still fragile, it was growing stronger each day. Her mother, meanwhile, had become a storm cloud hanging over the entire ranch. The Cold War between them was obvious to everyone, creating tension that made even simple family meals uncomfortable. Her mother would make cutting remarks about people who got ideas above their station, while Jake would respond with steady compliments about her work and abilities. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, over something that should have been a cause for celebration. She'd been working with Jake to prepare for a cattle sale, using knowledge her father had taught her about judging beef quality and market timing. Together, they'd identified the best animals to sell and researched current market prices. When a buyer from Dallas expressed interest in purchasing 20 head at a price that was 30% higher than her mother had been expecting, it should have been good news for the struggling ranch. Instead, her mother was furious. I can't believe you went behind my back like this, her mother said, pacing around the kitchen while she tried to prepare lunch, negotiating with buyers without even consulting me. Who do you think you are? She took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. I didn't go behind your back, Mama. I told you we were researching sales, and you said to handle it however we thought best. I said handle the research, not make deals that affect this entire family's future. Jake, who had been washing up at the kitchen sink, turned around. Mrs. Rodriguez, she did excellent work on those negotiations. The price she got us is well above market average. I wasn't talking to you, her mother snapped. And I'm getting tired of you encouraging her to overstep her boundaries. Something hot and bright flared in her chest. What boundaries, Mama? The boundaries that say I can't contribute anything meaningful to this ranch? The boundaries that say I should just stay quiet and let other people make all the decisions? Her mother's eyes widened in shock. She'd never been challenged so directly before, especially not in front of Jake. "Don't you dare take that tone with me, young lady. I am your mother, and this is my ranch." "Our ranch?" she corrected, surprising herself with her boldness. "Daddy left it to all of us, not just you. And he taught me things about running it that you never bothered to learn." The silence that followed was electric. Her mother's face had gone pale, then flushed red with anger. "How dare you throw your father in my face? Everything I've done since he died has been to keep this family together and this ranch running. While you were crying in your room feeling sorry for yourself, I was working 16-hour days to keep food on the table. I know you worked hard, Mama, but that doesn't give you the right to tear me down every chance you get. That doesn't make it okay to tell me I'm worthless and useless and that no one could ever love me." Her mother glanced at Jake, then back at her, clearly uncomfortable having this conversation in front of an outsider. "We'll discuss this later, privately." "No, we won't." The words came out stronger than she'd intended, but she didn't take them back. "We've had this conversation privately for 3 years and nothing ever changes. You just keep telling me all the ways I'm not good enough, all the ways I've disappointed you, all the reasons why I should be grateful that you put up with me. That's not—" Her mother started, but she kept talking. "It is exactly what you do, and I'm done pretending it's normal. I'm done accepting that this is just how things are between us." Jake stepped closer, not interfering but making his support clear through his presence. "You want to know what your father would think?" her mother said, her voice getting louder. "He'd be ashamed of how selfish you've become. He'd be disappointed in how you're tearing this family apart over some stranger who's filled your head with nonsense." The words hit their mark, just like they always did. But this time, instead of crumpling under the weight of her mother's disapproval, she felt something fierce and protective rise up inside her. "Don't you dare tell me what Daddy would think. Daddy told me I could do anything I set my mind to. He said I was smart and capable and that he was proud of me. He never once made me feel like a burden or a failure. Your father was too soft on you. He spoiled you and filled your head with dreams that were never going to come true. Maybe. Or maybe he saw something in me that you refuse to see because it threatens your need to control everyone around you." Her mother took a step back as if she'd been slapped. "How dare you speak to me that way? The same way you've been speaking to me for 3 years, she shot back. "The difference is I'm not saying it to hurt you. I'm saying it because it's true and because I can't live this way anymore." The kitchen had gone completely silent except for the sound of their heavy breathing. Her little sister appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices, but Jake gently guided her back toward the living room. "If you can't accept me as I am," she continued, her voice shaking but determined, "if you can't stop treating me like I'm some kind of punishment you have to endure, then maybe I shouldn't be here anymore." Her mother's face went white. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe it's time for me to make my own choices about my life. Maybe it's time for me to stop waiting for your approval and start believing that I might actually be worth something. You can't leave. You have responsibilities here. This family needs you. This family needs the work I do, but you've made it very clear that I, personally, am more trouble than I'm worth." Her mother looked around the kitchen as if searching for support. But Jake remained steadily behind her, and her siblings were safely out of earshot. "You're being dramatic. All mothers and daughters have conflicts. That doesn't mean you should abandon your family." "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm choosing to stop accepting treatment that makes me feel worthless. There's a difference." For the first time in the conversation, her mother seemed genuinely shaken. "You're my daughter. I love you." The words should have been comforting, but they felt hollow after years of evidence to the contrary. "Then prove it. Stop tearing me down every chance you get. Stop telling me I'm not good enough. Stop treating me like I'm a burden you're stuck with instead of a daughter you chose to raise." Her mother was quiet for a long moment, and she could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. Fear of losing control warring with the possibility that she might actually lose her daughter entirely. "I don't know how to do that," her mother said finally. Her voice smaller than usual. It was the closest thing to an admission of guilt she'd ever heard from her mother, and it took some of the fire out of her anger. Then maybe we need to figure it out together. But I won't keep living in a house where I'm constantly told I'm not enough. I can't do it anymore, Mama. It's killing me. The conversation ended there, with her mother walking out of the kitchen without another word. She stood in the sudden silence, shaking from the adrenaline of finally speaking her truth. Jake approached carefully, as if she might bolt if he moved too quickly. How do you feel? He asked quietly. She considered the question, taking inventory of the emotions swirling through her chest. Terrified, she said honestly, but also lighter, like I've been carrying something heavy for so long that I forgot it was there until I finally put it down. That was incredibly brave. I don't feel brave. I feel like I might throw up. Jake's smile was gentle and understanding. Sometimes being brave and feeling scared happen at exactly the same time. Outside, she could see her mother standing on the front porch, staring out at the pasture where their cattle grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. For the first time, her mother looked smaller, older, less like the intimidating force that had controlled her life for so long. Change was coming whether they were ready for it or not. The question now was whether her mother would choose to grow with it, or whether she'd keep fighting to maintain a dynamic that was slowly destroying them both. Either way, she knew she couldn't go back to being the silent, defeated girl who accepted criticism as her daily bread. That girl was gone, replaced by someone who finally believed she might be worth fighting for. 6 months later, she stood in the kitchen of their own small house, sunlight streaming through windows that she'd hung curtains in just last week. The coffee pot was bubbling on the stove, filling the air with the rich smell that had become part of their morning routine. Outside, she could see Jake feeding their small herd of cattle, moving with the easy confidence of a man who was exactly where he belonged. Their wedding had been simple, just a ceremony at the courthouse with her siblings as witnesses. Her mother had attended, sitting stiffly in the front row with an expression that mixed disapproval with something that might have been resignation. It wasn't the joyful family celebration she'd once dreamed of, but it was honest, and that seemed more important now. The months following her confrontation with her mother had been complicated. There had been awkward conversations, painful silences, and small steps forward followed by frustrating steps backward. Her mother struggled to change patterns that had been years in the making, and there were still moments when the old criticisms would slip out before she could stop them, but there had been progress too. Real, meaningful change that gave her hope for the future. The turning point had come when her mother finally admitted, during one of their careful conversations, that she'd been scared. Scared of losing the ranch, scared of raising 3 children alone, scared that if she didn't push her daughter to be perfect, everything would fall apart. I thought if I pointed out every mistake, you'd learn not to make them, her mother had said, tears in her eyes. I thought I was making you stronger. You were making me smaller, she'd replied gently. But I understand why you did it. Understanding didn't erase the hurt, but it had started the healing process. They were learning to talk to each other like adults, setting boundaries while still maintaining their relationship. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than the toxic dynamic they'd lived with for so long. The sound of Jake's boots on the porch steps brought her back to the present. He came through the door with his usual smile, hanging his hat on the hook by the kitchen table. "Morning, beautiful," he said, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," she answered honestly. It was true. The nightmares about being worthless and unloved had gradually faded, replaced by dreams about their future together. "Good, because we've got company coming today." She turned in his arms, raising an eyebrow. "What kind of company?" "The Hendersons want to bring their granddaughter over to learn about cattle care. Apparently she's been begging them to teach her ever since she heard about what you did with our sick animals." The request would have terrified her 6 months ago. The idea of being responsible for teaching someone else, of being seen as an expert worth learning from, would have sent her into a panic about all the ways she might fail or disappoint. Now, she felt excited about the opportunity. How old is she? 12, I think. About the same age you were when your father started teaching you. She smiled, remembering those precious afternoons following her father around the ranch, soaking up every word of wisdom he shared. The idea of passing that knowledge on to another young girl felt like completing a circle. I'd love to teach her. We could start with the basics, how to approach the animals safely, how to read their behavior, maybe some of the natural remedies Daddy taught me. Jake's face lit up with pride. You're going to be an amazing teacher. You explain things so clearly and you have such patience. Even now, after months of his encouragement, compliments still felt foreign to her ears. But she was learning to accept them instead of automatically dismissing them. I never thought I'd be the type of person someone would want to learn from, she admitted. Well, you are. And not just with ranch work either. Your little sister has been bragging to everyone at school about how smart her big sister is. The mention of her sister warmed her heart. The relationship with her siblings had improved dramatically since she'd started standing up for herself. Her little sister, especially, seemed to look up to her in a way that was both humbling and inspiring. Speaking of family, Jake said, settling into his chair at the kitchen table, your mother called yesterday while you were in town. She poured coffee for both of them, trying to read his expression. Good news or bad news? Depends on how you look at it. She wants to hire us to help with the spring branding. Says she could use our expertise. The request was significant for several reasons. First, it meant her mother was acknowledging their success and competence, something that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Second, it was an invitation to work together as equals rather than as parent and child in a hierarchy. What did you tell her? I told her we'd discuss it and get back to her. I wanted to make sure you were comfortable with the idea. She thought about it while sipping her coffee. 6 months ago, the idea of working closely with her mother would have filled her with dread. The old dynamics would have reasserted themselves, immediately turning her back into the uncertain, criticized girl she'd once been. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She'd proven to herself and others that she was capable, knowledgeable, and valuable. Her mother's opinion, while still important to her, was no longer the defining factor in how she saw herself. I think it might be good for us, she said finally. A chance to work together as adults, as business partners rather than mother and daughter. And if she slips back into old patterns? Then we'll address it in the moment and remind her that things have changed. I'm not afraid of her disapproval anymore, Jake. I know who I am now. The confidence in her own voice still surprised her. Sometimes. The woman who spoke those words was so different from the broken girl who'd hidden behind laundry lines and accepted every criticism as gospel truth. That afternoon, when the Hendersons' granddaughter arrived, she felt nervous but excited. The girl was bright-eyed and eager, full of questions about everything from what the cattle ate to how to tell if they were healthy. My grandpa says you saved a whole herd when they got poisoned, the girl said, looking at her with obvious admiration. That's so cool. I want to learn how to do things like that. As she began explaining the basics of cattle behavior, pointing out signs of health and illness, she realized that Jake had been right about her teaching abilities. The words came easily, and she found herself naturally adjusting her explanations to match the girl's level of understanding. The most important thing, she told her young student as they stood near the fence watching their small herd graze, is to trust yourself. Adults might tell you that you're too young or that you don't know enough, but if you pay attention and learn from people who care about you, you'll be amazed at what you can accomplish. The girl nodded seriously, clearly taking the advice to heart. Later, as they watched the Henderson family drive away, Jake put his arm around her shoulders. You were incredible with her, he said, natural-born teacher. It felt good, she admitted, really good. Like I was honoring my father's memory? By passing on what he taught me, he'd be so proud of you. Of everything you've become. She leaned into Jake's warmth, watching the sun set over their small but growing ranch. In the distance, she could see her mother's property, where her siblings were probably helping with evening chores. The relationships there were still healing, still finding their new normal, but there was hope now where once there had been only pain. You know what the best part is? she said to Jake as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. What's that? I finally understand what you meant that day when you said I was everything you'd ever needed. Because you're everything I needed to, not to fix me or save me, but to help me see what was already there. Jake's smile was soft and full of love. What was already there was pretty amazing. As they walked back toward their house, she thought about the girl she'd been just months ago, afraid, beaten down, convinced of her own worthlessness. That girl felt like a stranger now, someone she remembered with compassion but no longer identified with. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to grow and learn and contribute. There would be difficult days, setbacks, and moments when old insecurities tried to resurface. But she faced the future with confidence now, knowing that she was loved, valued, and capable of far more than she'd ever imagined. The scared, broken girl was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to claim her place in the world. And that, she thought as Jake's hand found hers in the darkness, was the best kind of new beginning anyone could ask for.